EdTalks, the podcast where we explore the ideas and strategies shaping the future of learning and development. In today's episode, we are diving into what organizations truly want and need in 2025 and how L&D professionals can drive meaningful performance change. Joining us today is Thomas Bailey, an award-winning L&D leader with over 20 years of experience, from leading capability development at Blackmores, Coca-Cola, and Nestlé to his current role as the president of the New South Wales division of AITD, as well as running his own development consultancy. So let's get ready for engaging conversations that's all about transforming learning into real-world results. Hi, Tom. It's so lovely to see you here today.
Hi, Ina. Thank you for that very kind introduction. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I'm really excited for the conversation that we are going to have, and I know that it's going to be packed with a lot of examples and what it truly means to drive change. So before we go into that, we always start from rapid fire questions. And the first question is, what book or resource can you recommend on L&D or educational topic?
Right. Number one book. If you work in L&D and you haven't read this book, you need to go and get it and find it. How People Learn by Nick Shackleton-Jones. It's my favorite book, and it was it had a massive impact on my career and my thought process, and I highly recommend it as the number one book if you're in L&D. Now, if you're a little bit more seasoned, I would recommend the L&D Handbook by Michelle Parry-Slater, which has just come out in its second edition. I feel like I'm selling books here, but it's more of a almost you moving on a bit. So if you're a seasoned practitioner in L&D, then Michelle Parry-Slater's book is excellent. And then one final book that isn't L&D, again, it's a bit more foundationary, but Coaching for Performance by Sir John Whitmore, which is just a classic. If you're new to coaching, and coaching is very important, check out that book. It is, again, it's not new and innovative, but it's really good and really foundationary into coaching. So you should cover that.
Brilliant. And for 3 seasons of our EdTalks, we haven't had any of those recommendations, which the more we move with episodes, the more harder it is to get books that are not repeating. So yeah, thank you for these 3 brilliant recommendations. Who do you recommend to follow and invite to this podcast from L&D experts?
So the man and gentleman that is David James on the L&D podcast. He is definitely worth following. He's very good. I know, Ina, you follow him as well. He's very good. I would recommend Ross Stevenson.
Oh, he
Ina
was
and I were
there.
just talking. Yeah. We
Yeah.
were just you and I were just talking about AI, and he hates to be called the AI guy, but what he is he's a technology guy, and he has a little product on LinkedIn called Steal These Thoughts. And it's definitely worth keeping an eye on it. He gives you gold. And
Yes.
from an L&D standpoint, it's just really helpful. 2 other people, Bob Mosher, 5 Moments of Need. He's a mega brain, really good, worth following. And bit left field, but Donald Taylor and his Global Sentiment Survey, which is out now. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, check out Donald Taylor's Global Sentiment Survey in L&D. He publishes the reports. It's the only report that is global around sentiment. And I know, Ina, you know it as well. But
Yeah.
it's definitely worth getting on. They're currently you can currently fill out the survey actually and be part of it if you're in L&D. So
Yeah.
I could keep listing people, but I'll stop there.
No, I think that we've got a pretty perfect list of staples to follow and invite, right?
Yeah.
So next one, which is a bit tricky to answer, but I think it gives a lot of perspective. Could you share a memorable failure or setback in your L&D journey, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, you know what? I mean, I'm failing all the time, and it's great to fail because unless we fail, we don't know how to move forward. And I know I'm going to give you an answer in a minute. Whenever you see failure, you kind of go a bit funny. You go, oh, gee, am I failing? But there's been so many setbacks, and it's good to have setbacks. That's how we learn. We get in the uncomfortable zone of that. One memorable one that I think comes to mind was particularly uncomfortable. I was working in a global multinational, and I, I was it's very vulnerable and very open. So I appreciate you're all taking this in the right way. But I remember I went in to present about a leadership program, and the way the organization was structured is you had sales directors responsible for each business unit, and they'd all bought into this idea, this really cool leadership approach that we were going to do. And I remember presenting it to this guy thinking, you know what, last guy, this is done. I've got everyone else in the bag. Happy days. And I presented it. Yeah, this is how we're going to do leadership. It's going to be great. Everyone else is in. It's going to be really good. And I just remember him looking up and going, no, that's crap. I don't want to do that. And I don't know if you've ever been in that meeting where you've suddenly gone, okay, what do I do now? And it was
Yeah.
one of those moments. It was horrible. It was horrible. Um, and obviously I had to pivot quite quickly, and I had to kind of hide my emotion and be like, oh, okay, yep, tell me more, tell me why you don't. But he was quite dismissive about it. And what I later found out is because he'd been away, he hadn't heard of this. So he was reacting from an emotional point of view to go, well, I don't want any part of it because I haven't been told about this before. Anyway, the way I worked around it was he had some direct reports who he listened to. So I worked on them and their counsel to get them to sell it into him rather than me go back to sell it into him. And it was the learning for me was just different styles of communication, just take a different approach. And I think later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about learning through emotions, but that was certainly time where I learned through my emotions. That was quite something.
Yeah, thank you so much for the honesty. I appreciate that. And I know it's sometimes hard to talk about situations like this, but I bet everything that we've all had something similar. And I think a lot of people can relate to the situation, if not in the same context, but the emotional connection. So that's something that we will discover a little bit later and talking the language of business as well. So next on, what question must be asked on a job interview for L&D specialist?
100%. How will you impact business performance? That's it. That's the number one question. If someone asks you, I don't know, how good are you at admin, or what's your favorite presenting style? All of those are great, but how will you impact business performance? Because if you're not impacting business performance, what are you there to do?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
hard. That's a hard answer, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And well, it makes you think. So lastly, if you had to give just one piece of advice for someone starting their career in L&D, what would that be?
Okay, so I'm going to break the rules and do two. And I'm sure people have broken the rules before, but that I'm sure that's fine. So the first thing is take risks, fail fast, and learn quickly. It's great. Honestly, we don't learn if we're always cautious and we don't try new innovative things. So do try new things, fail fast and learn. Sorry, fail forward and learn fast. And then the other point is, and it's similar to that, is don't just do what L&D's always done.
Mhm.
Really try and understand your business and think about what are the things that the business needs to do better. Most commercial businesses need to make money, or they need to save cost. How are you being part of that solution or being part of the strategy in that business? Try stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. We are done with the rapid fire questions and we are moving slowly towards the main part of our podcast. First on the agenda is driving real performance change, of course. And now I'm going to twist things up a little bit. So I would like to go back actually to rapid fire questions and the question
Mm.
that must be asked on the job interview. Could you repeat it, please? And how would
Yeah.
you answer that? So that I think it's really connected and it makes sense to mention.
Yeah, so how you impact business performance is the answer in the job description. So, uh, driving real performance change. I'd probably start with something called performance consulting, and sometimes it's called performance management. There's a guy called Nigel Harrison. It's another name for you. But he has an approach, a little model which he uses very successfully. There are other consulting models out there, but if you take a performance mindset before you do anything, then you're taking more of a consultative approach rather than what a traditional trainer would do. And why that is important is because it's highly relevant. Essentially, as a performance consultant or as a really good L&D activist, you want to bring change, and you want to bring positive change. You want to see a commercial difference. You want to see performance better. You want to see behavior change. And if you really want all of those things, then you need to be taken seriously. And if all you're doing is fulfilling a brief and churning out some training that, I don't know, a marketing director thinks is great because they did it 20 years ago, then you're probably not doing any of those things. So what you do is you start with performance management. And this is where you start influencing, because people start paying attention.
Yeah.
And performance management starts before you do a learning needs analysis, before you do a training needs analysis. Right at the beginning, you say, what is the thing that we're trying to solve? What is it that we're actually trying to do? And it might not be anything to do with L&D. It might be to do with IT issues. It could be to do with holidays. It could be to do with staffing or bonuses, or it could be any number of things. But it might be an L&D issue. So, but having that holistic mindset, again, is you're adding value to the business. You're
Mhm.
providing a service as a trusted advisor. Does that all make sense so far? I feel like I'm waffling.
Absolutely. But I must say that it's not often that we hear putting performance analysis before learning needs analysis.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. 100%. Swear by it. So, you hear in our industry a lot of people talk about learning needs analysis and talking about training needs analysis, and both are great in their own way. But almost imagine a funnel. You're down here, you've already assumed that you have a learning need to address. Actually, if you start back up here as a trusted
mhm,
advisor in the business to go, well, what is it that you're actually trying to do? And, it may be something unrelated to learning and development. It could be something, as I said, unrelated. So that's where you're starting before you go down into a learning needs analysis or training needs analysis. You're helping that thinking, because let's be really honest. When someone comes to you and says, hey, can you put on a load of resilience training? Have they really thought about the needs that are there? Or have they gone, well, the other team have got it, or we did it last year, or I read a Harvard business article that said resilience is really important. So if no one does that thinking, then you're just going to end up with something half baked. It's down to us as L&D professionals to add that value at that top end and to go, well, hold on, here's where I can add value. Let me listen to what it is that you're trying to do. Let me
mhm,
ask the right questions to unlock that. And so I think that's really important before we even start talking about learning needs or training
yeah.
needs.
But it can be tricky, if you allow me just to follow up a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, go.
It can be a little bit tricky to position yourself, meaning, let's say I am an L&D manager and I've got a head
Mm,
of sales who comes up to me and says, Ina, hi, I need resilience training because it's fashionable, because I read it in a Harvard business article, right? How do I say, how do I position myself? How do I prove my point that let me help you more,
yeah,
let me drive a real performance change, right? So have you got
yeah.
any strategies on that?
Oh, definitely. And we could role play it now, but we're not going to. We're not going to. But what I would say is it's really difficult to start with, especially if you've worked in an organization and you've been the order taker for years and years, and you suddenly go, "Oh, that's really good. But why?"
Yeah.
You're not. That's going to be a really awkward conversation. So I guess before I answer that, what I would say is think of a continuum, and this applies to other places, but it's really relevant for us in L&D. On one end, you've got an order taker, and that's the traditional L&D role that we all know about and organizations kind of expect. And on the other end, you've got someone adding value, a true trusted advisor in the business. That's where we should all be aiming for, where we are adding serious value to the business. But you don't just start there in most businesses, because they don't know it. They don't know what they don't know. They expect you to fulfill a brief, which is a poor resilience training. There's a need for resilience training. I'm not picking on it. It's just one of those things that people will say.
Mhm.
So when people come to you, firstly, I would say actively listen to what they're saying. Don't just go, oh, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Tell me why. You've got to really listen to what they're asking for. So if someone comes to you and says, oh, hi, Ina, we did that resilience training last year. Can we run it again? You're at a pivotal moment in that point where you go, yes, okay, great. And almost a virtuous, what's the word? A virtuous circle where, the line manager gets what they think they need. You get you're kind of happy because everyone else is happy,
Yeah.
and the people probably get something. People probably get a day out because they're like, "Oh, resilience training, fantastic! I can sit and eat some free food." But what happens is we don't really see development happen generally in those situations. So in that pivotal moment, it's about listening to the words and the nicest way possible, just asking for more information.
Hmm.
Oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that. I'm not saying no, obviously, but hey, tell me more. It's resilient. So what? How come you're seeing that as a need? Oh, you did it. I know you did it last year. Tell me more about what you're going to do with it, or why has it come up again? Oh, well, the team have got nothing else to. They're not going to say team have got nothing else to do, and they want a day off. They're going to say something. They're going to say something like, and actually, let me give you an example, which I was going to bring in later. In one of my L&D roles, someone came to me and said, "Yeah, hi Tom. My team sales are down a little bit, and I need presentation skills." Which is fairly standard in commercial capability. And I'm always a bit funny about presentation skills for a couple of reasons. But I just didn't really think it was I didn't believe it was an authentic request.
Hmm.
Let's think about it. Let's reframe it that way. Is it authentic? Do they really know what they want? Or is it actually authentic and they've got really good reasons? So anyway, it said presentation goes, it's really interesting. Tell me more. Tell me what is happening with your people. And they said, well, sales are kind of struggling a little bit. And what's happening is people don't know how to present. Okay, so they don't know how to, these are salespeople who've been doing it for years. I mean, I know your team. Your team are pretty experienced. Surely they know how to present. They've done it before. They've done it loads of times. Yeah, they probably know how to present, but they're not doing it consistently. So I'm like, oh, okay, right, interesting. Anyway, conversation goes on. Just all these kind of really gentle pokes to kind of find out a little bit more information. What it transpires is it's not that they have issues with presenting per se, and certainly not using PowerPoint, but it's more that they don't follow a consistent path in their sales calls. So they don't follow a consistent process. Now that takes you down a different route. That takes you down the route of what is our sales model and what do we do at each of those stages in the sales model? How do we have that conversation? At what point do we follow that? Which is a different need than the one that was presented, which was um, uh, presentation skills. And I think I can't remember if it was David James or someone else said this. And forgive me, whoever it was, whatever expert it was, maybe I'm going to say Nigel Payne, but I might be wrong. They said like you wouldn't go to a doctor and say, "Yeah, hi doc, I've got a bit of a headache, so can you saw my arm off?"
Yeah.
Obviously, you'd go, "Hey doc, I've got a headache or whatever the ailment is. What should I do about it?" But yet in L&D, we expect people to come to us with the problem and the solution at the same time, which is crazy. They
Yeah.
don't know what the solution is. So anyway, I hope that kind of colors it a little bit. It's those gentle questions. It's being willing to listen, and open to listen. And sometimes it takes a couple of conversations. So if it's getting a bit frosty, what I would recommend is you say, "Let me think about this and reflect on it. Do you mind if I come back to you with a couple more questions?" Yeah, of course, no problem. Unless they say, "I need it tomorrow." And then you say, "Well, get real. Come on."
Yeah. So, speaking of just diving a little bit more into what organizations really want, so it's all about asking the right questions. We've got that so far, but from your experience, are there any top priorities that organizations are really finding themselves in need? So, we as L&D, we still want to expect to understand what kind of requests we are going to have because we can't possibly know all areas of business. So that's why, we are expecting this, just as you said, that we are expecting that we are going to be approached with problem and the solution as
I think what you're asking is how do we appeal to what people want in an organization, and how do we present that in a better way? And the number one rule that I always follow is obviously if L&D could understand what the business strategy is. So a lot of L&D departments sit in HR, and as a rule, a lot of L&Ders will know what the HR strategy is, and that's great if you do. Fantastic, you're probably part of it. But you need to understand what the business strategy is, because L&D in a lot of organizations isn't going to promote you forward. if you want to be a trusted advisor, you need to break out of just being an HR and being a part of the HR brand. So you need to understand the business strategy. What is it? What are the big things that the business wants to do over the next 5 years? And let's take a typical organization. It will be things like, and this is really hard because billions of organizations, but sustainability is a big one at the moment, has been for a while. So how is what you're doing bringing around sustainability or working on the sustainability agenda? Another one would be probably something around in HR around engagement and retention. And that's fairly obvious how that's going to fit in. Another one will be some kind of sales target. So we want to be this big by this year. We want to be market leader, or we want to have 30% of the market share in a particular market. Brilliant. So how can L&D, how can you help that happen? And then the second point to this, so once you've understood what the business strategy is, everything you do should be within that business strategy. No more, random raft building or I don't know, flute lessons on a Saturday. There's got to be your curriculum or the things that you're doing to help the business have got to be aligned to the strategy. And that's a really good question to come back to people when they first come to you. So when they first come to you and say, have you got resilience training? How's that fit within the business strategy? That's a great question to ask. Oh, wow. Okay. I haven't really thought about it. Or, that's a really clever question. The second part to this is always think about what's important to the function that you're working in. So if you ever work with sales, I know I keep mentioning sales, but obviously things like net sales, EBIT, or EBITDA, trade spend, if that's applicable to your business, all the commercial outcomes, that's the language of sales. Ultimately, we're talking dollar or pound or euro amounts. That's what's important. So think in that way. When you're thinking about how you're going to measure it, think that currency, think money for sales. If it's supply chain, it's probably going to be time. How are you saving time? So think time in your measurement. And you can apply this. Ask them what their measure is. What's the most important measure for you? What is success for you as a function? Think about IT. What would ITs be? I have no idea. But what would finance be? Again, we're back to probably a cost analysis.
Mhm.
Um, but speaking that language of those functions when they want to talk to you is really important. It's important in terms of your credibility, but it's also important in terms of measurement, how you're going to demonstrate impact.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love the part that we've covered the speaking the language of business. And it's actually the part where you mentioned that usually we are a part of HR, which is, yeah, it is how it is, but we all know that ideally should change. You mentioned also that usually engagement is something what they ask in terms of HR, right?
Yeah,
So how can L&D professionals design programs that sustain engagement and at the same time drive long-term behavioral change? Because this is the motivation of the organization, right? I need
yeah,
more
yeah,
numbers in this because I
yeah.
have this in terms of learner engagement. How do we
Mm,
keep the balance
mm,
between
mm.
those two?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to say is employee engagement is super important, but it's also really super hard to measure. And that's where we need to get really specific about what it is that we're trying to do. A lot of companies use one of those engagement surveys from the big organizations, and that's their measure for the year on has it gone up, has it gone down, and that's a tough measure to use, but it's one of them. But it really depends on what the organization is trying to do and what their strategy is. But back to your question about engagement, engagement is really important. We do talk about behavior change in organizations, and I haven't used my quip yet, so I will just throw this in there. It's a bold statement I'm about to make, and some people may disagree, but if you're not changing behavior in what you're doing in L&D, you're probably not doing L&D. You're doing either team building or you're doing compliance. And most people will say there's nothing wrong with those areas, and there isn't anything wrong per se with those areas. Um, I'm not a massive compliance fan. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm really sorry to all the listeners, but they serve a purpose. You just don't brand team building as learning, and we've all seen it where you've run, I don't know, negotiation training for lots of money, and what do people get out of it? they see their mates. It's brilliant. They had a great time.
Yeah.
There was I will come back to your question, but there's another there was a on the David James's L&D podcast. He interviewed a lady called Tracy Waters, I think, from Sky, the big media company. And I'm paraphrasing, so Tracy, if I got this wrong, then forgive me. But she said that they stopped doing training, and it took quite a bit of time for people to realize that they actually stopped doing mandated training. But when they did, they found that people got four things out of their training. They got rest, they got recognition, they got relationship, and they got reward,
Hmm.
which is great. What they didn't, what they weren't able to measure was the development impact or the behavior change. And that goes back to what I said, if you're not changing behavior, what is it you're doing? Are you really doing an L&D job, or are you doing team building? And like I said, nothing wrong with team building. Team building is great. It brings people together, but that's a different outcome. Even in team building, if you want behavior change, then yeah, you need behavior change. But in terms of that engagement piece, everything has to be human-centered design. It really does. Gone are the days where you can dump content on poor, unsuspecting learners and expect them to be able to cope or find their own solutions. And people still do it. I won't name names of companies, but you have to think about the learner. I was actually just talking to someone today at a corporate here in Australia, and they were talking. They were evangelizing about how important it is that we think about the human being who has to go through this or has to experience this. And that for me is the number one engagement piece. Is this fit for a human being? There's quite a lot of training programs and L&D initiatives which it's like you're coding a robot. I mean, it's just not a human being is not going to be able to take in that information and remember it. It's just impossible. But yet we still do these old-fashioned traditional approaches.
Hmm. Absolutely.
I don't know if, yeah.
Yeah.
No, no,
Sorry.
no, go on, go on, go on, go. No, 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 shoot.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how slowly from performance change we've changed the conversation to behavioral change. And truth be told, if you, okay, maybe I might be wrong, but if you do a rough analysis on what the content is out there, books, posts, podcasts on L&D topics, you will see roughly 70% about behavioral change. Performance change is not something that is commonly discussed, and it's something that you hear normally less. So that's why I
Yeah.
think it's so important that we've covered here. But then what's the relationship between those two?
Mm. Um, so there's a massive difference. It depends where your team is at or your group who you're trying to transform, let's say, or improve. If they're already high performers, then the behavior change will be softer and it will be a bit different. If they're really struggling, then then you have to see behavior change in order to see performance change. Let me give you an analogy to kind of bring this to life, so we're not just chucking around word salad. Think of a soccer team or a football team, right? If you put 11 people on a pitch, and I'm sorry, I know it's a sports analogy, but you put 11 people on a pitch as part of a soccer team or football team, and half of them have never kicked a ball, half of them have never seen the game before, don't know what the lines mean. Like, you're going to expect them to do quite badly. Now, it doesn't matter how great their equipment is. It doesn't matter if they've got the best gym in the world to use. You're going to have to see behavior change for them to get better. They're never going to win a game, i.e., their performance is never going to be good until you change their behavior, until you get them better at football, but you get them better at working as a team. And this is kind of the key to what we do in terms of behavior change and understanding people's motivations. I normally think of like a Venn diagram, and a
Mhm.
Venn diagram is basically two circles overlapped. If people aren't aware, it's not complicated. In most corporates, you've got two circles. So the first circle is everything that individuals care about: fly fishing, uh, the football, I don't know, their other half, their partner, um, the weekend, their dog, gardening, I don't know, whatever. And the other side, you've got everything that organizations want people to care about, which is um, cost analysis, which is sales targets, which is um, auditing accounts, non-fraudulent activity, tax compliance, all this interesting stuff. And then overlapping in the Venn diagram is this tiny little sliver where people care, which is things like, I need to do my expenses. How do I do them? I want to get paid. So where's the form? How do I fill out my expenses? That's what I care about at this very moment. For the majority of things in this side, it doesn't really matter. We're not really engaging people in an organization. For this, if they're not interested, then someone like a Nick Shackleton-Jones was set out that these people need an emotional connection to what it is that, why do they need to be interested in it? How do you create that excitement and that interest around tax or fraud or cybersecurity?
Mm-hmm.
And you do that through some kind of emotional experience that they have to it. And that's where you have a behavior change. That's where you bring about some behavior change. The alternative is, you think about when you start a new corporate, you fill out those forms, don't you? Oh, what happens if an ammonia alarm goes off? I close the windows, or do I run down the stairs? And if I see someone trip over, what do I do? Do I phone up someone? All those multiple choice questions you get when you start. Um, they don't change behavior. They literally, no one's going to do anything differently, and 1% of people might. The majority of people won't. Whereas if you simulated what would happen in an ammonia alarm, and people were like, what's going on? What's happening? They would remember it. They would remember the day that the ammonia, I don't know what ammonia is, what ammonia alarm went off and what they had to do. That would code that information. So if that is super important, if you're working in a warehouse situation or a factory, then have some kind of simulation. That's why we have fire drills. It's not a very emotional response. But it's that idea that you have simulations or you have some kind of experience that as a human we then code.
Then that's a wrap on today's episode of EdTalks. A big thank you to Thomas Bailey for sharing his expertise and practical advice on driving performance change and meeting organizational needs in 2025. We hope you're leaving with new ideas and inspiration to elevate your L&D strategies. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and follow EdTalks for more conversations with industry leaders shaping the future of learning. And until the next time.